Well, hey there, everyone. Welcome back to our second series in this article series with Will Warren of the Economic Recovery Corps. Will, it's good to see you, man. How you doing?
I'm good. I wanted to mention last time that I'm not dead yet. You keep calling it the recovery corpse instead of the core. But
Core,
yeah,
yes.
I'm still here. I'm still alive.
Recovery Core. Thank you. Definitely not the corpse. Well, we're going to be diving into some workforce initiatives that are helping drive change in rural America, especially here in Eastern Kentucky, where both of us are from. And this is put on with Shaping Our Appalachian Region. It's a nonprofit dedicated to transforming lives and communities across Eastern Kentucky here through meaningful employment and economic self-sufficiency, which is a couple phrases that you'll hear a lot as we talk through things. This term of meaningful employment, economic self-sufficiency is a big key theme for us as well. Today, though, we're in this second article in the series, Will, the Hidden Workforce. I really like that title. I think that's super interesting reading through the article and reframing the disconnected as a development asset. And so maybe just give us a little catch up on you, kind of what you're doing, and for anyone who's new, maybe what your work has been up until now.
Sure. If no one listened to the last episode, I'm Will Warren. I'm an Economic Recovery Corps fellow, like you mentioned, but just to give a little bit of context to that. The Economic Recovery Corps is a group of 65 individuals. We had to apply for this program, which is sponsored by the International Economic Development Council, who manages it. They got some funding through USEDA, and they are partnered with a number of national partners as well, to include the National Association of Development Organizations, NATO, NACO, National Association of Counties, the National League of Cities, Rain Catalyst, and a few other partners, national partners that collaborated to come up with what they refer to as the Economic Recovery Corps. And in doing so, it placed 65 individuals with 65 underserved areas or host organizations. And in the application process, I just happened to match with Shaping Our Appalachia Region, or SOAR, in Eastern Kentucky. And just a little bit about my background. I'm originally from Eastern Kentucky. Opportunity led me away after graduate school, and this program, which really is a new way of thinking about economic development and providing capacity. It's a building component to underserved areas, and it gave me the opportunity, extraordinary opportunity, to come back home and do this work in economic development and community development that I've been doing all throughout the country, back in the place that I've always called home.
Well, that's awesome, and we are definitely happy to have you back here. And we're all cheering on the Cats as usual. Getting closer to basketball season each day.
That's right. That's the thing. In Kentucky, we don't even like football's great, and we love our football team, but it's really about tailgating and talking about the upcoming basketball season. That's what we talk about at football tailgates. So yeah, can't wait
It's
for that.
the way we,
Big
we
Blue,
bond here.
yeah, Big Blue Madness is only a couple weeks away, right?
It's true. It's true. It's a big deal. So, Will, let's jump to the article a little bit. I love the phrase "the hidden workforce," and maybe just kind of start today by diving into what is the hidden workforce. How can we begin to rethink a little bit of the labor shortage narrative that you hit on, kind of in the introduction of the article there?
Sure. So, with Shaping Our Appalachia Region and kind of the project that I focus on, it's the EKY Runway Program. The EKY Runway Program was set up through some funding that we got through USEDA, through the Recompete grant. But as part of that grant, its main focus is on the prime age employment gap. And those are individuals between 25 and 54 that have just completely fallen out of the workforce. And so when I refer to the hidden workforce in this article, yes, it's focusing on that 25 to 54, but we hear all the time, especially in rural areas or in Eastern Kentucky, that people are leaving that people don't want to live there anymore, that they're leaving the area, therefore they're leaving the workforce, that we have less workers, when the fact of the matter is a majority of people are just completely dropping out of the workforce. It's a major issue, especially in rural areas, but specifically in Eastern Kentucky. In order to apply for the recompete grant, I think I mentioned this in the last episode, but I'll mention it again. You only need a 5% gap, and that means the labor force on average, the national average is around 80% of people in your region that are actually in the labor force. You only needed a 5% gap. That means 75% in the labor force in your region in order to apply for the grant. In Eastern Kentucky, there's almost a 30% gap, meaning only around 50% of the actual population, working population, is in the labor force. And where are those other individuals? They're not leaving the area, they're still in the area. And that's what I refer to in the article as the hidden workforce. How can we find that hidden workforce and get them back to meaningful employment?
Yeah, I really like you mentioned that the workforce isn't missing, it's just been disconnected. Um, Maybe dive into that a little bit because I know it can be confusing too on terms like unemployment. How is that different maybe than like the prime age employment gap and just some of those different factors that would make someone really disconnected from the workforce more so?
Yeah, and like I said, like you said, they're not missing, they're disconnected. And just in reference to disconnected, you mentioned the prime age employment gap and unemployed. When you're talking about unemployed, those are individuals that are actually looking for work. They don't have a job, but they're actively looking for work, and therefore they're counted in the unemployment rate. And right now, the unemployment rate's relatively low. It's relatively lower than it's been in a while. And so if you look at that, our region is not looking too bad when you're looking at unemployment. But if you go beyond that, beyond the people that are actively looking for work and the ones that are no longer even looking for work. And that is due to a number of reasons. I mentioned in the article these barriers of overcoming employment, and that's the disconnected that I'm talking about, the ones that are completely disconnected from the labor force because of a lot of these barriers, whether it be substance abuse, whether it be transportation issues, whether it be childcare, having to difficulties finding childcare or just suffering from that, whether it be lack of clothing for a job, lack of tools to be able to have a job, or just navigating the system in general. I think that's one of the biggest barriers that we find in our region. People just give up because it's so difficult to find, not only to find a job, but just to navigate the resources that we do have, and just overcoming a number of these barriers, whether it be health related or other, is just a big issue and makes people get to that point of that definition of disconnected completely from the workforce, from the labor force, and no longer counted in that unemployment number.
Right. And I know one thing you focused on in the article there a little bit was the idea that this type of work is really an economic development strategy. And sometimes it can be seen more as like maybe like a social program instead of an actual way that can enhance the economic development of, especially some of the regions like where we are here in Eastern Kentucky. So how do you think that this different type of thinking about the hidden workforce applies to economic development?
Yeah, I think I mentioned in the article, one of the things that drew me to becoming an economic recovery corps fellow was this idea about a new way of thinking about economic development. And when you think about that, this new way of thinking, it's really about how do you drive the local economy, and how do you, I think at the core of that is building on your own assets, meaning whatever your strengths are, And in Eastern Kentucky, we know for certain, and we've been told, and we tell people, one of our biggest assets are our people. And so, how do we focus on our people and not seeing this disconnected, this hidden workforce, or these people that are trying to, these individuals that are trying to overcome these barriers as a social barrier? We're not a recovery program. We're not trying to, while we may, when individuals get to us, the most important thing may be stabilization. We're not looking at this as a social program or a program in general. We're looking at it as an economic development driving force for the region. I mentioned a bunch of numbers in the article about just reconnecting some of these individuals to the workforce of what an economic impact it could have on the region. And so, not looking at these individuals or this reform as a social program means it's really an economic development strategy, an economic development growth strategy for the region. If we can reconnect one of these individuals, it makes an impact not only to that person's family, but to the community at large, whether it be from a tax base standpoint, whether it just means community engagement, whatever the case may be, it's an economic strategy and not just not at all a social welfare program.
I think too in the article there you kind of mentioned the ripple effect of that, which is I thought was a really good point as well. Of if you think about how many people there are that are kind of disconnected right now, imagine if more and more of them do get plugged back into the workforce, what that actually looks like for the local economy overall. And maybe you could even just kind of unpack that a little bit. I know you mentioned like the taxes and stuff like that, but I think that's a really interesting point that so many of us kind of miss when we think about this type of work.
Yeah, I mean, if you just want to look at the numbers, when we applied for the grant, so with the EKY program, as you well know, but obviously the listeners may not, we focus on 12 of the most coal impacted communities in Eastern Kentucky, where a majority of the distress is centralized in Eastern Kentucky. And if we ran the numbers when we were applying. If you look at that based on the population, based on the 25 to 54 age working workforce, the prime age employment gap, that 30% gap, is around 34,000 workers. So, say for instance, if you want to look at numbers, if we just, and this is in the article, you can read it in the article, but if you just look at a third of those, say 12,000 individuals, if we got 12,000 individuals back to work, say on average $15 an hour, even hourly wage, um, 10 in regards to tax contributions, a conservative number of 10%. That would be, um, well, the annual wages on $15 is around 300, almost $375 million for 12,000 individuals getting back to work. If you look at the tax contribution of 10%, that's $37 million in new annual taxes to these communities. And so, if you just strictly look at it in regards to numbers, um, that's incredible for the region, for the economy, and having these ripple effects. But even beyond that, I also want to mention as a success metric, but also as the program at large, just getting beyond the numbers. I mean, we talk about 12,000 people, we talk about the tax base, the annual wages, that's all great. But we also talk about every day with the work that we do, helping one person at a time. If we can just help that one person might lead to 10, might lead to 20, 100, whatever the case may be. But you can see the human aspect of the work as well, whether it be finding someone a new pair of glasses. Recently, we had some funding, some wraparound support, found that could support someone, and we got them a pair of glasses so they could go to work. We have some wraparound funding to support other additional items like clothing, like rental assistance, like dental assistance, things like that that could promote that one person's opportunity to get not only stabilization employment, but also development in their career and a pathway to meaningful employment. So it goes beyond the X and O numbers. I mentioned 300 almost 375 million in annual wages. It goes beyond that to each individual person and the impact that it can have on their personal life, on their family's life, and on their community.
Absolutely. I know one thing that really kind of stuck out from the SOAR Summit this year was the idea of partnerships and a lot of the workforce tracks. And you talked a little bit about wraparound support there, and that seemed to be a big theme that kept coming up with all the different organizations that are involved in workforce development. And maybe talking to a little bit, speaking about the runway program in general, just how has it structured itself to really reach the hidden workforce? Through whether that's partnerships or just the structure of the program. Like, what's made the Runway program kind of unique in being able to interact with this hidden workforce and help them take those steps to get back?
Yeah, so as you well know, the EKY Runway program is a pretty expansive program. When we were designing it, it has a number of programmatic tools. There are actually seven. We have a direct partnership with Appalachian Regional Healthcare and Pikeville Medical Center. But some of the core principles around how do we find this hidden workforce and how do we get them back for meaningful employment. One, I list these in the article and write about them extensively, but it's really around human uh, I call it human navigation as infrastructure in the article, but that's really around kind of this coaching or this support for individuals and how does the runway do that? Every participant that comes through gets an empowerment coach, and that empowerment coach is not necessarily a case manager. They're really a guide for that person that may not ever had that before in their life. So there are not only helping that person find resources, they're walking along with them in their shoes, right along beside them to help them find resources to overcome barriers, but also to help them find that initial employment, but not to stop there, to help guide them throughout the process of finding, of one, stabilizing that person, helping to navigate the resources, finding meaningful employment, and then following them along their career journey or career pathway to ultimately meaningful employment throughout their lifetime. Um, some of the other things, training, another core component is around training and skill-based learning. We've designed some really short pathways to employment. I think a buzzword right now is skill-based learning, getting away from kind of the idea of having to have a diploma
Mhm.
to get to work, to really having the skills or the credentials necessary in order to work. So we've designed some working with partners, working with end employers, which is really important. You don't want to have trainings just to train. You want to have trainings that is directly associated with employment at the end of that training. And so we work with employers to help design some of these trainings that are industry recognized credentials or that produce industry recognized credentials for individuals so that it will make them more employable as an outcome of the training programs. Another core component you mentioned, it's really about partnerships. The EKY Runway program was not set up as a SOAR initiative. It was set up with SOAR and dozens of other partners in the region. No one organization, no one person can really turn things around in an area, in a region, in a municipality, whatever the case may be. It's really about the partnerships that SOAR has formed, but that we have formed throughout the region that are unifying around this important goal of getting people back to work. And so I mentioned some of the wraparound support funding that we have to get people to help people overcome some of the barriers. But we also work with amazing organizations that provide that support as well, like Volunteers of America, like Goodwill. If we have a client that we can't service directly, we work with some of those partners that can service these individuals. I mentioned getting one of our clients eyeglasses so that they could overcome a barrier in order to get employment. That was through Volunteers of America. We reached out to them. They had some sufficient funding in order to get that client those eyeglasses so that they could actually find employment, find meaningful employment. And so that's just one example of us working with a partner to help someone on their pathway to recovery, on their pathway to meaningful employment. And so it's these partnerships throughout the region that really help drive not only what we do, but drive a person throughout their journey. And it's really that navigation piece, that stabilization piece that leads into belief that they are important, that dignity of work, belief that they can find employment and that they are important enough to find employment in Eastern Kentucky. And then that last piece that I talk about in the article is really around the shared data, learning, and accountability. We really focused from day one on building out a data system that could measure what we were doing, that could not only hold us accountable, but help us in regards to, we're big believers with what we do with our program in regards to continuous learning. And so as we go, we're collecting an incredible amount of data in order to help understand what we're doing and if what we're doing is working. If what we're doing is not working, we want to improve on that so that it can work for that individual's goal of finding meaningful employment. And so shared data, learning from that data, holding ourselves accountable, holding others accountable, and sharing that data with other organizations throughout the region just goes a long way in building our system and helping us overcome our challenges and getting us all to work together towards this goal of employment for all in Eastern Kentucky.
I really like the what you said too on like just like navigation. I think that's been a big thing, even just my experience so far with the runway program of the empowerment coaches seem like they really help clients navigate all the different partners, organizations to find support because that's something that often it can be something that people don't realize how difficult it is to find the help you need because there's not really like a one-stop shop. And so I think that's part of the runway program is kind of being that place where you can get people to where they need to go and help them find those resources without having to kind of struggle through it on their own.
Yeah, I mentioned before these barriers to overcoming employment, childcare, housing, transportation, some of the biggest, substance abuse, mental health. But like you said, I think one of the biggest barriers that we have resources in Eastern Kentucky. We have a plethora of resources. I think one of the biggest barriers is just navigating those resources.
Right.
How do you do it? Like, especially if you've been out of the labor force, if you never had employment at all, like where do you go? Like how would you even know how to navigate the system the way it's currently set up? And so you're right. Our EKY, the runway program helps people in that regard to navigate the system.
So what kind of outcomes are we seeing with the runway program and reconnecting, the hidden workforce that people might find interesting to kind of see some of the results that we're seeing?
Yeah, we have some X and O numbers in the article. In the beginning, to be honest with you, I personally was worried about actually finding the hidden workforce. How are we going to find these individuals that may have not worked in 10 years, may have not ever worked or had a job? A lot of these individuals don't even want to be found. So how do we reach out? How do we get connected to the enough individuals to get them into our program that we could really make a difference in Eastern Kentucky. That was, I thought, would be one of the biggest challenges. We quickly found out, as you well know, that wasn't necessarily one of our biggest challenges. We actually had so many people through our outreach process to come in that we've had to cut back on outreach of the number of actual leads that have come in. Just in the first 5 months, just to give you some numbers, just in the first 5 months of our program, we've had over 1,000 leads to come in to our program. We've had almost 500 of those leads enter our program or become clients and been offered services in our program. We've had almost 100 jobs already. That's people, whether it be a stabilization job, whether it be beyond that stabilization job, 100 jobs that have produced almost $2 million in annual wages for the region. That's just the first 5 months of the program. You have to take into account that those first couple of months were just a ramp up of trying to figure out, in the beginning, let's be honest, we were building the plane as we flew it, kind of type of thing. And I mentioned that shared data and continual learning, we've learned from day one and had to pivot several times in our process of making it better. And so if you just look at those numbers and take into account that the first couple months were us just trying to get up to speed of what we were doing, you're talking about just a couple of months and those numbers. Project that out over the 5 years that we had planned for this grant and the way we're currently growing and continue to grow, continue to learn from what we're doing. Sky's the limit on the number of people that we can affect and the effect that we can have on the region. But I also wanted to mention the point that I made earlier too. It's not just about those numbers. It's about those individual personal stories that come from what we're doing. I think it's not, I mean, it is important to talk about the numbers, but I think it's even more important to talk about those stories, those individual stories of those clients that have really, through this program, through the partnerships, through all the organizations in this area, how they are affecting individuals and changing their lives. There is one story that I mentioned in the article of a client that came through and how this program has changed their lives. I hope you read that part of, if you read nothing else in the article, read that client's story just to see how our program is not only producing numbers, but affecting people's lives and helping them for the better.
I love that. There was also there was a success story that the team shared out. I think it's maybe last week, but inside of the Social Enterprise Accelerator, which is an aspect of the runway program, but even helping like businesses get started. I think that's also a really neat aspect of the runway program and some of the outcomes is yes, there's a lot of workforce development focus, but there's also the Social Enterprise Accelerator side. We're working with entrepreneurs or people that are looking to start maybe a childcare business or transportation business in the region, which is always exciting to see, new things getting started here.
Yeah, that's the thing. You and I hear about these success stories all the time because we're in it. Uh, our team is talking about these success stories amongst each other all the time. We need to talk about these success stories and get these out into the community. The community really needs to know about these success stories, about these individuals, about how they are changing their lives and making not only themselves and their families generationally
Hmm.
better, but also the effects that they're having on the community. I mean, these are not just successful stories for these individuals. These are community success stories for everyone in the community. And the more we can tell them, the more the community can get to know these individuals, get to know these success stories, not only the better for the community, the better for the program, but better for every client that comes through. So I know you have some ideas about getting these success stories and telling these to the community, and I can't wait for everyone to find out about
We're happy to keep sharing
them.
Well, as we kind of get ready to wrap up, I'd love to focus in a little bit on towards the end of the article, we talked about policy and kind of some practice changes that could help really foster this type of work. A couple of things that really stick out to me that I don't know why, just what's interesting to me was the incentivize inclusive hiring. I would just love to hear a little of your perspective on that. I thought that was really interesting. And then I really liked how you talked about the idea of ecosystems, not just funding specific programs, but actually building ecosystems that are connected together. I think that goes back into the whole navigation aspect of helping people figure out how do all these things work together for us to actually move the ball farther down the field.
Yeah, I think there are a number of policy implementations or suggestions in the article. Just the two that you mentioned, incentivizing inclusive hiring, inclusive hiring, especially with the clients that we have, we focus on very vulnerable populations, as you well know, but it's really um, our primary focus areas are around substance abuse, around justice involved, low income, low education, a lot of times single parent households, but um, a lot of times those individuals are the ones that are getting overlooked in the hiring process, and maybe rightfully so for reasons that people just don't understand. But another focus of ours and partners that we have and partners that we work with are around this opportunity of second chance hiring. We really want to, and that word opportunity, I feel like it is an important one. When people ask me what economic development is, what economic developers do, it's really about opportunity and providing opportunity for a community or for an individual. So I think that the idea around incentivizing inclusive hiring around these second chance opportunities for individuals is extremely important to helping that hidden workforce or reconnecting, re-engaging people that have been out of the workforce for so long. So potentially providing tax credits or wage subsidies for people for employers that would um, take that chance or give that opportunity for an individual, embedding some of those inclusive hiring into grants. Say, for instance, a project were to get a local grant, having some of those inclusive hiring practices embedded within that funding or within that subsidy would help give some of these opportunities to individuals to help reconnect. Um, and also just celebrating the successes or building public recognition around employers that actually do participate in second chance hiring or do provide that opportunities for people to, and it's really about, this whole article, this whole series is about that reconnection, that re-engagement. And so how can we get more employers to identify that as an economic strategy and provide that opportunity for individuals that are coming through our program, that are becoming stabilized, that are being seen as part of the community, part of society, and an economic development growth strategy for the region. So those are just some of the ideas that are introduced in the article. There are a number of others, but the other focus area that you talked about, just not just funding programs, but funding ecosystems. I think it's important for us to all we can only make so much change as one organization. If we all work together, we could build, we could strategize around so much more. I guess it obviously takes a village type of momentum, or all boats. What's the phrase? All boats. How's it go?
I don't know if I know the boat one. I've heard the village
Oh.
one.
Okay. Well, we'll leave it at that. But it's really about building these regional ecosystems around a unified voice or a common goal. And that goal really is meaningful employment. And so, how do we invest in these shared data systems if that's what it takes? Engaging third-party researchers to come in and take a look at what we're doing to help us to continually improve. That third-party eye is always a good idea. You can get caught up in what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and not really see how you can make it better. Someone from the outside could come in and help with that continuous improvement, and really documenting the journey along the way. So it's really about building an ecosystem around this commonality of finding meaningful employment, re-engaging individuals, thinking of them as an economic strategy and not just a program.
Right. I think we see a lot of that even inside of the runway program itself, the way you all structure the program more as an ecosystem, really, the way it connects to all the other aspects of the program. I know, I think at the summit, I think Barb said something about, one client becomes all our client, kind of referring to how the empowerment coaches and the peer mentors work together, and people that would be focused more on resourcing or different aspects of the program. It really becomes an entire ecosystem and team effort that's helping those clients kind of move through that journey to eventually find their employment.
Yeah, that's a good segue into the next article that's really going to focus on um, the empowerment coaches and that ecosystem of how a client journeys through the EKY Runway program.
That sounds awesome. I think that's probably a perfect wrap up point for us then too, as we tease the next article coming up.
Awesome.
Anything on the next article you'd like to let everybody know about?
Um, I think I mentioned it's really that focus, that navigation piece that you mentioned that the article talks about is really an important component to helping to not only helping to overcome barriers, but really important component to the EKY Runway program in general. And so the next article is really going to focus on the empowerment coaches, and then that ecosystem within the EKY Runway program and how a client makes that journey through that ecosystem and how important it is for them to have that human-centered navigation, that proactive, I think proactive is an important word, but that proactive human-centered navigation through this process in finding meaningful employment. And so the next article really will just lay that out, but also give the reader an idea of uh, how important it is to have that support, to have that structure, and how the EKY Runway system program is set up to do that.
That sounds great. I love the term human-centered navigation, so I'll have to jot that one down. Hang on to that one. Well, thank you so much, Will, for chatting with us today. As always, if you guys want to learn more about shaping our Appalachian region, you can head up soar-ky.org. We have a ton of great other articles on there as well as this article that Will's written and all the ones to come out. Anything before we wrap up, Will?
I'll just leave it with go Cats.
There we go. All right, well, we'll see you guys next time.